Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, finishing up the week on a strong note. Final pre-recorded show for us. We're back in normal format again on Monday, so all the stuff that happens over the course of this busy recruiting weekend for UGA and everything else that's kind of taking place this time of year, I'm certain the folks at DawgNation have been helping you get caught up and stay up to date on all that throughout the week. And then on Monday, I'll come back and we will react to it all. It's going to be a really good time. But for today, we have a really good time in store for you too. Now, I'll admit something. Yesterday, we had planned on doing a lot more of our bold predictions from UGA fans. We got to pick up the pace on that a little bit because we have a lot of them and we didn't get through quite as many as we hoped. But we'll do some more of that today. We'll do Jeff Sentell today. We'll tell you more about a great giveaway courtesy of our friends at Kroger and Traeger Grills. We'll talk about that. And off the top of the program, Kirby Smart not too long ago, and actually a couple of different times here over the course of the summer, has used a pretty interesting description to discuss Georgia's most recent national championship. Why is it interesting and why does it matter? We will talk about that off the top of the program today, and I'll give you my final bold prediction for Georgia for the upcoming season. This one may not be too much of a surprise and maybe ultimately not all that bold, but we'll give it to you anyway. It is on the way. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I had intended yesterday to read a lot of your bold predictions that many of you shared with me about Georgia for the upcoming season. We did not get through quite as many of those as we hoped. We had kind of crammed a lot of stuff into yesterday's show, I guess. So today, my hope is to kind of give you a lot more. And admittedly, we have to kind of operate a little bit of a quicker pace than we maybe did yesterday. But we'll deal with that here coming up in a moment. That's going to be really fun. Also, another reminder about a great giveaway we have going on with DawgNation right now. We'll tell you about that here coming up in a moment. I've got my final bold prediction for Georgia for the upcoming season. I'll share that with you momentarily. But prior to that, I want to kind of lead into this way. You know, Kirby Smart a couple of times this summer. I know he did this when he was on the Atlanta radio station 680 The Fan the other day, and I guess most recently maybe on the Paul Feinbaum show the other day, has used what I think that some might say is sort of an interesting description to talk about the national championship that Georgia won in 2022. Now, I think we kind of understand why Kirby's doing this, but nonetheless, I do think it sets us up for something kind of interesting here because Smart was talking the other day, and, you know, I guess no huge surprise here. You're on the Paul Feinbaum show. Paul finds a way to make it all about Nick Saban, so he's asking Kirby Smart about learning from Nick Saban and being around Nick Saban and this and that. And Kirby obviously used that as a moment to kind of talk about his own team. Now, he's also complimentary of his former boss there when he was on the Feinbaum show the other day. But nonetheless, Kirby kind of talked about, hey, what he learned on all those Alabama teams, some of which that had a chance to win national championships and didn't, and how he takes that with him to Georgia right now. And he uses a pretty interesting word to kind of sum up what Georgia's season last year could have been, at least from one perspective here. This is kind of interesting. This is Kirby Smart on a wide-ranging, array of topics here as it relates to his time working with Nick Saban from the Paul Feinbaum show a few days ago. Take a listen to Kirby here.
I think you learn lessons. I mean, we won back-to-back, and winning back-to-back was extremely hard then. It's extremely hard now. And then as you start to go on a journey for third, the pressure just tends to build. And we had good enough teams all those years to win it. But sometimes it takes a little luck. I mean, we got lucky against Ohio State. We got lucky against Missouri in a game we didn't play well. So it takes, in the SEC, it takes a little luck, and you have to have that.
I mean, let's be honest here for a moment, right? It's probably at least a little bit surprising that Kirby Smart describes Georgia as lucky last year versus Ohio State, lucky last year versus Missouri. If we're completely honest, that sounds like the kind of thing that a whiny Buckeye fan might say on a message board, more so than what Kirby Smart would say on the Paul Feinbaum show. That kind of comes across as maybe not quite the way in which Georgia fans want to think of their most recent national championship. Now, we sort of have an idea, I think, of why Kirby Smart's saying this, especially given the fact that he used the word. I mean, anytime Kirby uses the same word or the same phrase more than once, I think you, generally speaking, should probably assume that there is a message that's trying to be driven home here. And Smart's use of the word luck, or speaking about the idea of luck, with these national championship conversations over the course of this summer, I think that's probably meant to be a little bit of a message to his team about not getting complacent during the upcoming season. And it seems like with every national championship, the pushback against complacency probably gets a little tougher and a little tougher and a little tougher. I thought that Jake Fromm had some really interesting things to say about that on yesterday's show. And hopefully you get a chance to hear that yesterday with Jake Fromm talking about that very same thing. So I don't get too wrapped up in the idea of Georgia. They were just lucky. Kirby Smart even saying that to his own players. Some of y'all are just lucky. I think it will be interesting. People have the theory, and I know Nolan Smith's kind of done this before, where he's like, hey, we're going to use anything we can. We're going to make up something if we need to in order to have the right level of motivation. I think we'll know that really is very much a part of Georgia's overall repertoire. If at some point in time some anonymous coach or somebody in a interview somewhere, something like that, says, honestly, what I saw from Georgia last year, they were just lucky. I think if we see this kind of leave Kirby Smart's lips and kind of enter into somebody else's lips where we kind of say, it's one thing for Kirby to say that about his own team. It's another thing for some knucklehead somewhere else on ESPN or something to say that about Georgia. I think we'll have a very interesting idea of, kind of how much Georgia really does use some of this kind of stuff if eventually we hear somebody else also say this too. But nonetheless, I think it kind of stands as a surprising way to describe all this. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, is that I think that luck plays actually a pretty big role in football in general. It's a funny-shaped ball. It takes funny-shaped bounces, and how any game plays out, they're oftentimes very difficult to predict. You've heard me say before, college football, easy to project, not easy to predict. In other words, you can make a description on paper based on who you think is supposed to win, but actually seeing if you can determine who the real winner is going to be, college football has sort of a way of surprising you. And there's an element of luck that kind of creeps into all of this. But before the Ohio State fans sort of grab hold of this and say, see, I told you, y'all were just lucky a year ago because our kicker missed a field goal. Here's the thing you got to understand, and deep down I believe that Kirby Smart does understand this, is that missing a field goal is not necessarily just a product of bad luck when the field goal that you missed was 50 yards. In other words, that's not exactly a gimme field goal situation. And some of the coaching decisions that Ryan Day made kind of almost getting a little tight there maybe. It seemed like the collar got a little tight around Ryan Day near the end of that Peach Bowl last year and kind of settling for a 50-yard field goal. At least it sort of looked like to me. So Ohio State fans, before they kind of hang their hat on, it's just bad luck that befell us. We missed a field goal. Well, maybe if you were as aggressive at the end of the game as you were earlier on in the game, maybe you would have had a better field goal situation there. So I wouldn't exactly kind of completely attribute that to luck. There was an element of the Missouri game that probably did feel a little lucky. I'm not going to lie to you. There was a large portion of that particular Saturday where it just didn't really feel like it was going to be Georgia's day, and eventually it kind of was. Just sort of pulled that out. But how do you, I guess, combat against luck going the other way this upcoming season? And this is one of the things I think that really made Georgia special a year ago, is the fact that the way you keep from luck being a big issue for your team or having bad luck kind of ruin your chance of winning a national championship is you do what Georgia did in every other game last year besides Ohio State, besides Missouri. Frankly, Georgia was so good in most of the games that it played, TCU national championship, SEC championship, high-profile regular season game against Tennessee, high-profile regular season game against Oregon. Georgia was so good in almost every game that it played a year ago that even if it had bad luck still wouldn't have cost them the game. You could have had a ton of bad luck against Oregon, but in a game that you otherwise won 49-3, it would have taken a massive truckload's worth of bad luck to maybe even make that game close. Tennessee game, much to the chagrin of Vols fans, that game could have been as bad as Georgia wanted to be that day. You could have given Tennessee some good luck, and it still wouldn't have made a difference in the overall result of the game because Georgia was that much better. LSU, TCU, all that's the same kind of stuff. Which kind of leads me to, I guess, the point that I wanted to make to kind of close out our week. I've given you two bold predictions for Georgia already this week. A defensive prediction. I believe that Georgia will be in excess of 40 sacks again this season, resembling what it did in 2021 when it had 49. And I believe that Brock Bowers is going to be a Heisman finalist this year as he becomes the program's second ever 1,000-yard pass catcher in a single season. All of this leads to the big prediction, the one that I think everybody deep down thinks is certainly a possibility. In fact, so many people think it's a possibility that you're left to wonder how bold it really is. But when you give the historical significance of this, the fact that Kirby Smart said in his own words a minute ago that a lot of great teams have tried to do what Georgia can try to do this year, and in a single season, they just come up short. So certainly nothing is given, nothing is guaranteed. But my final bold prediction to close out my vacation week before I'm live with you back again next Monday, or on Monday, is to tell you that I do believe that Georgia will go for 3 in 23. I believe this team is going to win every game it plays in 2023. I believe it's going to win its third straight national championship. And that's going to be I believe, the most amazing run that any team's ever been on in college football history. And as remarkable as that sounds, I believe it checks out. I believe that it is true, that Georgia will be well on its way to putting together a string of dominance unlike anything the sport has ever seen. And I believe it's going to happen. And for me, a lot of this argument kind of relates to kind of where Georgia is here right now, clearly very good. But some of this also kind of relates to what we saw a year ago, that if a team had been better, they could have taken advantage of some occasional bad luck from Georgia, or they could have made Georgia, sweat it out more in games in which Georgia was otherwise winning comfortably. But the fact of the matter is, a year ago, there just wasn't really anybody that for a full season played on Georgia's level. And this particular year, I think the easiest case to make for why Georgia will do this is because there is no obvious threat standing in Georgia's way. The typical nemesis here in the SEC, Alabama, we've documented this a lot over the course of the offseason. It's not even obvious that Alabama will be a part of this conversation this year. Based on what you saw from Tennessee this past season in a game they thought was going to be their crowning achievement, the fact of the matter is they proved themselves unready for prime time. There's very little to make me think that this year is going to be any different. Ohio State gave Georgia the fight of its life during the Peach Bowl. You at least give them credit for that. But frankly, Ohio State, it's not even obvious they'll emerge out of the Big Ten given the fact they've lost to Michigan 2 years in a row. So when you look at what could prevent Georgia from winning this national championship this year, there is no obvious foe standing in the way to say, well, you got to somehow figure out a way to get through or around this particular team. That current team just doesn't exist. That Georgia really is on a plane sort of by itself right now. And with that as seemingly true as it is, or seeming as true to be as it appears to be, then I think you're left to conclude that Georgia will go for 3 in 23. We believe it's going to happen. That's our bold prediction. Now, some of you also had a great collection of bold predictions for us there as well, and I told you we'd share more of those with you here today. So what do you say we introduce the show, and then we'll get ready to do just that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. And one more time here on this particular vacation week, coming to you in a kind of a pre-recorded fashion, but happy to have you checking in. Looking forward to Monday to being back to our 1st and 15, 9:45, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. Of course, all video platforms every single day at 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, world-famous DawgNation.com. So many fun ways to have you check in with us. We just appreciate you doing that. Big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making it all possible there as well. And also big thanks to our friends for Kroger who are so great about allowing us to save money at Kroger when we're shopping each and every week, including using some of those really cool digital coupons to be able to do that there as well. In fact, you can go online, go digital, and save big time at Kroger right now. So go to the Kroger website, Kroger.com, go to the Kroger app, and then open up your account, get going there, and start downloading and saving with some exclusive digital coupons courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Go to Kroger.com/signup for more on that today. Kroger.com/signup for more on that today. We're going to get Jeff Sentell to close out the week in a moment. Your bold predictions as it relates to Georgia, many more of those on the way here too. But prior to that, speaking of our friends at Kroger, want to give you another update on an ongoing giveaway contest we have at DawgNation right now. Kroger, Traeger Grills partnering together on what is really an amazing thing here. We're celebrating American heroes. And when I say American heroes, you think about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. Obviously, there's certainly a place for all of that. But I'm talking right now about those average, everyday American heroes who are going above and beyond to make our lives better, who've been a part of our past, and we just want to celebrate and honor them. In fact, when you do that, when you tell your story at DawgNation.com by either uploading a photo or sharing a short video, it could get you very close to being selected to be a winner courtesy of Kroger and Traeger Grills, because between now and June 17th, you can go online to DawgNation.com and tell your story. As I said before, you can upload a photo, upload a short video, and someone who does that is going to be selected, and then you're going to be a winner courtesy of Kroger and Traeger Grills. In fact, you're going to get the Traeger Ironwood XL Grill. You're going to get a $500 gift card there as well, courtesy of Kroger. This started yesterday on June 1st. The opportunity to enter runs all the way through June 17th. You can go to DawgNation.com. You get more details about all of this. But the important thing is right there, top of the page, DawgNation.com. Click into that. That's your chance to enter to win. Tell your story about an American hero in your life. And your photo, your video will be what kind of gets you in there for your chance to be selected here coming up pretty soon here. So that's going to be a great, great giveaway, courtesy of Kroger, Traeger Grills. Make sure you check that out online at DawgNation.com today. All right, before we get Jeff Sentell coming up here for a fun conversation, let's go around the DawgHouse, and it's served up today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Now, I am going to try to have a little bit better pace than I had yesterday when we kind of started sharing some of these bold predictions that many of you had. And the purpose of all this is to kind of bring you in on a conversation that's been ongoing this week. We've heard from Jeff Sentell on this. We've heard from Mike Griffith on this. I've shared you 3 of mine. Connor Riley kind of set the stage for us last week by giving some of his, and we wanted you to have your moment there as well. So what do you say we roll through these? I'll comment on a couple of these here and there, but I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot about how Georgia fans are feeling about this upcoming season and the individual players they think that could shine here. So let's see the first collection of these. Milton Skelton writes in to say for the second year in a row, a Georgia player will be in New York for the Heisman ceremony. We're getting a lot of that. I don't know if that's a Brock Bowers or somebody else, but Milton's kind of in on that for now. Wesley says, this is Wesley Owens, UGA wins the national championship after beating LSU, Bama, and Florida State in 3 straight games. Boy, wouldn't that be fun? So he's got, I guess, a Bama team making the playoff as an at-large and a Florida State national championship. Wesley, that's really fun. Kathy Weinhardt says, Malachi Stark's going to win the Jim Thorpe Award and have 2 pick sixes on the year, including one against those lousy, stinking Gators. Kathy, I love that. That's a lot of fun. Casey Jones, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, says that Georgia's going to be the one to end Florida's shutout streak. Almost did that in 2017. A streak that dates back to 1987. That's how long it's been since Florida's been shut out in a game. This could be the year that it happens, Casey. Boy, that's a lot of fun. Abernish says, my bold prediction is that UGA fans, even the Stetson haters, will finally appreciate the job Stetson Bennett did for us the last 2 years. He says, not saying it's, Carson Beck's going to be bad, just that you're going to find out that it's not as easy as Stetson Bennett made it look. And I do think, Abernish, there's an extent to which that kind of is true, that sometimes people have a tendency to assume that Georgia can just pick right back up at the quarterback spot where it was in the past. And frankly, that's not always quite as easy to do. Certainly Stetson Bennett, a historic figure in Georgia football annals, and I think that's probably true. Lynn Vitri says we get the 3-peat, but we don't go undefeated. So there you go with Lynn, kind of maybe thinking about some of the luck stuff that Kirby Smart was talking about before. Yo-Yo34 says, I predict this will be the best defense based on points per game that Kirby Smart has had at UGA up to this point. Yo-Yo, I like that. Andy Stowe says Dan Lanning leads the Ducks to the playoffs and gets destroyed by Kirby Smart and the Dogs in the first round. Well, that's kind of a nice season for Dan Lanning if he can go to the playoff, but obviously to run into Georgia again, I'm sure he's not looking too much forward to that. Dog in Nashville says, how about a 2023 Pete? Obviously feeling good about that. Keith Pitts also thinks he's got a 3-peat coming for these Dogs. I like that. Fizzin D checks in to say, undefeated 3-peat. He said, I'll go even bolder than that. Carson Beck's a Heisman finalist. Branson Robinson gets 1,000 yards rushing. So really good stuff there. Let me do one more page on this. And at that point in time, we'll kind of move on with the next thing here. We'll share some more of these here at a different time. One more page here. David Fox writes in to say, Georgia gets at least 2 night games at home from either South Carolina, Kentucky, or Ole Miss. That may be the boldest prediction of all, just given the dearth of night games we've had here around lately. James Lawson checks in to say that Georgia versus Ole Miss, how about this? Top 10 matchup, and game day will be in attendance. If that turns out to be true, maybe not unexpected from a Georgia side, but maybe much better than Ole Miss is expected to be, given the tough schedule that Ole Miss will play prior to that. So pretty bold statement there by James. What up, Dan? Crazy for Swayze checks in to say that Georgia's going to score 80-plus touchdowns in the regular season. Wow, impressive there. Elite Dog Nation says Georgia's going to have 2 1,000-yard receivers, Brock Bowers and Dominic Lovett, and they're also going to have a 1,000-yard rusher in Kendall Milton. So Steven, very bullish in the Georgia offense right now. Chris Black calling for a 3-peat. Michael Dyke says go for 3 in 23, which is obviously the preferred method around here of predicting for a national championship. Raphael Mayberry predicts Brock Bowers in New York for the Heisman Trophy. Adam Thornton says that Ladd McConkey has a 1,000-yard season. Trey Droughty says that Georgia's going to have record-breaking sack numbers, even better than the 2021 defense. That means you're going north of 50 on the upcoming season if Trey's prediction comes right on that. Eddie Garrett, we can put Eddie Garrett on the other side of James Lawson here. Eddie thinks that Tulane's going to beat Ole Miss by a larger margin than Georgia does. So Eddie not quite as high on the Rebels this year as James Lawson was a little earlier. Ed Odom says, my prediction is that everybody will remember exactly why Mike Bobo was gone for a few years and nobody missed him. I hope I'm dead wrong. I really do. So Ed, not too bullish on Mike Bobo. We'll see how that plays out. I think the Georgia fans are starting to come around on Bobo here. but we'll see if that's the case. Scott Vickers says Michigan goes undefeated in the regular season and makes it to a national championship only to get thumped by the Dogs, who are going to go 15-0. Ohio State gets left out of the playoff. Florida State wins the ACC, makes the playoff for the first time. Actually, they did make the playoff back in 2014, so it'd be their second. And then USC wins the Pac-12 and makes the playoff. So Scott gives you a full picture of the college football playoff, which is one of the reasons why we love taking these bold predictions from UGA fans. So many detailed ideas about exactly how this season is going to go. So we have many more to share with you. We're going to do that on some other shows here to give folks their chance to have their voice heard. But that's a lot of fun here right now as we're around the DawgHouse, served up by the Finnish Long Drink. And speaking of the Finnish Long Drink, obviously I'm enjoying a little bit of vacation here today and this week. And, of course, you can make it a vacation anytime you want when it comes to the great tasting, ready-to-drink cocktail known as the Finnish Long Drink. It comes in a can, so it looks like a beer, but it's not. It is a ready-to-drink cocktail. It's a mixed drink right there in a can. You can pop the top, you can pour it in a glass, or you can just drink it straight out of the can, and you will enjoy it. You can get the Long Drink Cranberry, which is obviously cranberry flavored, the Long Drink Strong, 8.5%, alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, that's no carbs, no sugar, Long Drink Traditional, that's a blue can, the gin kick, the citrus flavor from the grapefruit, just really good. I love it. If you're at the pool, if you're at the golf course, whatever you're doing this time of year, back patio, front porch, whatever else, the Finnish Long Drink goes great with it all. You can even get one of those 8-can variety packs and enjoy 2 different cans of each of the 4 different Finnish Long Drink varieties. So please go to thelongdrink.com and find out where you can pick up some today, because it's pretty much available wherever you are now. And so many of our folks have tried it. They love it. And we've heard from them all, and so we want to hear from you too. So enjoy yourself some Finnish Long Drink here this summer, and then hit us up and tell us how great it tasted for you. So go to thelongdrink.com for more on that. All right, we're going to close out our week here in a moment by giving you the final series of bold predictions for each SEC team. We've been doing that all week long. That has been a lot of fun. But for now, I'm going to give somebody a chance to react to the bold predictions that I've shared. What about Brock Bowers? What about this Georgia defense here this year? And how about the idea of, boom, go for 3 in 23. Let's talk to Jeff Sentell about all that right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Glad to have him and all of you with us here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So back on Wednesday, Jeff Sentell and I had a great chance to discuss some of his bold predictions involving the Georgia Bulldogs the upcoming season. That's been a fun theme for us during this vacation week for us here this year. And so I thought it was appropriate, if Jeff's going to give me his, I would give him mine. Now, many of you have been hearing me share these throughout the week here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And, getting a chance to get some feedback from Jeff on this, I think can be really fun here. So, Jeff, thanks for coming back. This is your normal spot here on a Friday. And, of course, we normally discuss UGA recruiting during this time. And goodness knows there is so much going on as it relates to that. We'll let people know that as I've been away and not here live, reacting in the moment with all the official visits that have been going on and all the stuff that's happening, whatever is needed when it comes to Georgia recruiting, you're, of course, going to be live throughout the week, popping on during the weekend and doing things like that. That even though I can't be here in my normal spot covering this stuff the way we always do, certainly if need be, we'll be live on video, and I know you'll be a big part of that here as the month of official visits and, big-time seismic recruiting events that we've been promised. We're kind of in the midst of that playing out here right now. And, Jeff, I just want to say thank you so much for your willingness to kind of take it wherever it goes when it comes to something like this.
Hey, man, it is. I mean, listen, there's sometimes you just got to get away. Lord knows I don't make the best timing to take my trips in July when Georgia gets like umpteen thousand commitments in July, but that's the best thing for me or the best thing for you when you got your family. I'm glad you can get away. We'll hold the fort down for you. The news will keep pumping no matter what we decide to do or where we're at. And we'll try to cover it as best we can without the chortles that'll come, Brandon. I think this might be we're on the prediction business. Maybe this is a good segue for you. I'm going to predict about 3 or 4 more chortles for you this summer in terms of recruiting wins for Georgia.
I like that a lot. That's a lot of fun to think about. So something else that's a lot of fun, we've been doing bold predictions. You gave us some great ones on Wednesday. Mike Griffith had some great ones on Tuesday. We've heard from some UGA fans on some of those there as well. It's been a fun time on that. And I've been also throughout the week here sharing my own bold predictions, and I want to give you a chance to kind of react to what I'm putting out there and hopefully just kind of using this as kind of a springboard for a fun conversation to kind of close out what I think has been a good week for us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Let me start with my first one here. And I'll kind of work my way up to what's a bolder prediction. Not quite so bold, is I do believe that Georgia tight end Brock Bowers is going to eclipse 1,000 yards receiving here this year. My bolder prediction as it relates to Bowers is that I do believe, Jeff, that Bowers is going to be a Heisman finalist this season. Kind of unheard of for a tight end to do that. Prior to last year, maybe somewhat unheard of for a Georgia player even to become a Heisman finalist. We've only seen one, Stetson Bennett, last season, since Garrison Hurst was a Heisman finalist in 1992. But I think that the landscape kind of worked itself out here. We've seen unorthodox Heisman finalists a little bit the last couple of years. Selecting Bennett a year ago sort of gives you an indication that on the part of the Heisman voters, there's a little bit of a willingness to kind of want to find a Georgia player to honor with this particular distinction. And I think that Brock Bowers is going to cap off a historic Georgia career by being in New York City at the end of this season. What do you think about that, Jeff, as a bold prediction for the upcoming campaign?
Yeah, I like that. Kind of funny. The only thing that might make Georgia fans call that a little bit sweeter is if Georgia had his quarterback and Bowers there at the same time. But we know that's very hard to do with pollsters and biases and things like that, just the historical nature of it all. And, the one thing I think that it helps for a Heisman year for an unorthodox position like a tight end, Brandon, is I think it's helped that he has had 2 or 3 stage setter years, or at least 2 stage setter years, where everybody knows who he is. He didn't flash in the pan. One of the things you hear a lot of NFL draft guys tell me when I'm out and about or around is some of the NFL draft scouts I know, they say that the big sophomore year is really essential to be seen and evaluated then fully by the big guys during your junior year. And I think that's going to help Brock a lot. I think it's positional versatility. Maybe Georgia might do some of those things Kirby Smart tried to poison the well with, but saying they gave him some running back touches. So he might get some different looks. We all know he could do it on the jet sweep. He's had the big games. He's got the John Mackey Award. He's going to be a future first-rounder, Brandon. I think I'd love to get odds on that, and I'd love to place a bet on that one because I really like that prediction.
And I'll say it this way. Part of my reason for saying this is because I still think it's important to categorize just how good Bowers really is. I've said this the entire time he's been in college. I'll reiterate it again. Jeff, I wouldn't trade him for anyone. I wouldn't trade him for Caleb Williams. I wouldn't trade him for Marvin Harrison Jr. I wouldn't trade him for literally fill in the blank with anyone. It may be debatable as to whether or not he truly is the best player in football, regardless of position. But to me, even those 2 names I just mentioned a moment ago, I don't see anybody else that I would covet to have on this Georgia roster more so than Brock Bowers. That's how valuable I think he is. And then in addition to that, Jeff, I also think that Kirby Smart has a little bit of a sense of history here. Smart talked about Bowers in an interview the other day. I think that Kirby sort of realizes that this is more than just a really good player on a very talented roster. Last year at times, Georgia seemed content not to use him all that much because I think it wanted to kind of maintain a certain sense of morale and more guys could get touches. I think this is one of those years they sort of realized that this is their last time to use Brock Bowers. If they don't use him this year, they'll never be able to use him again. And they may turn him loose for a full season, a little bit more reminiscent of how they turned him loose in last year's national championship game. And that might be why he's propelled to an additional category to where he's been in the past, just because Georgia might be a little bit more intent to use him than it always has been in the past.
You know what, Brandon? What goes through my mind is I think there's some merit here. Everybody says Kirby's always thinking. He throwed up 3 fingers after the blasting at TCU. Let's remember back to the day after the national championship when Stetson Bennett couldn't have the post-game press conference.
Yeah.
And Kirby said something along the lines that we always got to have Brock in the bullpen, even though he doesn't like it so much or whatever, but he gladly and professionally goes about it, the media opportunities and the media responsibilities. I think Kirby was basically just priming him for he's going to have to do a lot of this as a junior at Georgia. He's one of those guys you expect to see him at SEC Media Days. Truly a face of the program that's also, like you said, Brandon, one of the 3 or 4 best players in anybody's book in college football.
Now, for my next bold prediction, I have to admit this is probably not quite as bold as I wish it was. What I'm trying to get at here on this, Jeff, is that I think the Georgia defense in 2023 is going to look a lot more like the one from 2021 than it did in 2022, which is obviously not to disrespect the Georgia defense that helped win a national championship and darn near was perfect, so many different times. But I think this year's defense may remind folks of 2021 more so than it did in 2022. And I guess my way of quantifying that is I believe this Georgia defense is going to eclipse 40 sacks again. They had 49 in 2021. Most dynamic pass rushing unit, most dynamic kind of havoc-wreaking unit of any other time in the Kirby Smart era. And I believe this defense this season is ready to do something similar. Now, I'll admit, not being quite as aggressive with the pass rush didn't hurt Georgia as much in 2022 as I thought that it might, although the caveat to that is when they really had to get after Hendon Hooker, they did. Even C.J. Stroud in kind of a shootout game back and forth, they still kind of got after him maybe more than some folks sort of realize. But one way or another, I think the manifestation of this Georgia defense this year is going to be back in the backfield again, back wreaking havoc, back causing problems for quarterback, far more sacks this year than they were in 2022. I believe they go over that 40 number here in 2023. Not the boldest prediction, I'll admit, but that's my second bold prediction for Georgia here this season.
I think what I like about your prediction, Brandon, is I think, like, let's face it, we've done a lot of shows where we kind of think that, we have to hem and haw a little bit, but we think that the 2022 team might have been better than the 2021 team. Well, the one reason we all pause is because of the 2021 defense, because defensively those teams were linearly a lot different. And, you remember the games last year, Brandon, where I think early on, Georgia gave up 22 points to Kent State, I believe, and then the next following week they gave up 22 to Missouri, and then obviously the end of the year where it didn't get much better without Nolan Smith, where they gave up 30 to LSU and so many points to obviously to Ohio State in a nail-biter game. But to me, the defense was a little off the Kirby Smart pedigree a little bit previous years, although it was still one of the very best in the country, top 5 in the country, whatever you want to say. But there's so many games in that 2021 defense. But I don't know if we can ever really encapsulate how great that 2021 defense is, where I think they went through Week 9, and they'd only given up 59 points, and that included 7 SEC games. The fact that they put up so many games, Brandon, where nobody got more than 14 points on Georgia up until the SEC championship game with Alabama, where they went wild a little bit. That's the standard in Athens, and I think the way they get back to that standard is putting the pressure on the passer, like you said.
Let me tell you what I wish I could have done for a bold prediction, but I don't really feel like I had enough information to say what I wanted to say. What I wish I could have done for a bold prediction as it relates to Georgia defense is there are X number of future first-round picks on this current defense. And the reason why I have to say future first-round picks is some of these guys are not draft eligible after this season. But I feel like I would potentially be shortchanging guys I haven't seen yet. For instance, could Jordan Hall be a first-round pick? He certainly could be, but I haven't seen that yet. I'm not going to make that statement until I've seen it. A guy like Mikael Williams, we talked about on Wednesday, I certainly believe he's on his way to doing that. I think at least one of the linebackers, maybe more likely Smile Mondin, could be a first-round pick. A guy like Malachi Starks, if you're watching a video, you see on your screen, that's a guy I think could come close to doing that too. I think one of the more debatable players heading towards the draft is Javon Bullard, who I believe, based on what he's done, certainly at the end of last season for Georgia, ought to be in the conversation of a guy who could propel himself into that category. But, sometimes it's not always easy for safeties to do that, which is where we think that Bullard's going to play this year. In other words, I didn't quite feel like I had enough information to really make the case for the number of future first-round picks on this defense. Marvin Jones Jr. coming back from injury is a guy I'd want to watch pretty closely in that spot here this year. So to me, that's still a little bit too much of an unknown for me to put a bold prediction next to it and then really sign my name next to it there as well. That's sort of the one that I wish I could have gone with, but I don't quite feel like I had enough to really do it the way I wanted to.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love it as you were explaining your case there. I was going through my mind, and I said, well, there's so many freshmen. Got to remember, Georgia had signed, 6 freshmen that were top 60 overall prospects for the defensive side in 2023. And I'm just going to conservatively put my estimate together there that only 2 of those will make it. And then the rest of the roster, Brandon, I think a pretty conservative number might be 7 future first-rounders on that defense. I'm not trying to hamstring myself, but you see Javon Bullard ranks as the number 1 safety in the country right now on some of those way too early mocks. I think Malachi Starks is clearly a future NFL player, future first-rounder. I think future first-rounder to me seems like somebody between Damon Wilson, who he hasn't played yet, but then Marvin Jones Jr., and then obviously you've got Samuel and Pemba. There's a lot of potential there. Let's just say one of those ends up being a first-rounder. And then I think obviously you got to think about the man down low, Mikael Williams, who I'm predicting to have double-digit sacks this year.
Yeah.
Quite easily, you could get to 5 or 6, 7 names right there. With the biggest part of it, Brandon, is there are guys that we think will be first-rounders that they're also the prototype NFL look for a linebacker. Like Shmuel Munden's a great example. It's exactly what you want your first-round linebacker to look like, in that kind of different player, but checks a lot of boxes physically like Quay Walker did, whereas maybe Nakobe Dean, brilliant player, he didn't check those boxes physically for what you want your first-round linebacker to look like, even though he had All-American College Football Hall of Famer type production. And I think there's just so many guys. I mean, you think about Jamal Jarrett, a big defensive tackle. We're going to wait and see on him. I'm not going to lump him into my estimate. And then even mention Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen, those, or even Troy Bowles. Those are all three guys that have. You look at it, and you don't feel like you've been overserved, Brandon, on a tailgate game day.
Sure.
To think that one of those three names, one of those four names, would be an NFL first rounder.
No, I think that's probably right. And I guess what I'm thinking as you're saying all this is, if I'm remembering correctly, the high water mark for Georgia during the Kirby Smart era, or frankly during any era, is the 2020 defense, right? Because that defense had 8 future first-round picks on it, if you count, I guess, Jermaine Johnson and with the other Georgia guys who were there. So I'd love to be able to tell you that this would be a great hot take, or I should say a great bold prediction. I don't quite feel like I've got enough ammunition to really sign my name next to it. But if you were to say 2023 Georgia defense will have at least 8 future first-round picks on it, matching what obviously Georgia did in 2020, that'd be a great bold prediction. I don't quite feel like I'm there. I mean, I'm certainly not disputing the fact that it could happen, but I don't know that I feel certain enough to really, stamp it as my own bold prediction. But if you could get there, that'd be a great bold take. Be a great bold take.
The other thing is, we didn't even think about Kamari Lassiter. We didn't think about A.J. Harris. We didn't think about Dalen Everett. Dalen Everett, my man, drips NFL first-rounder with everything he looks like. And then Kamari Lassiter has had all the production in the world, where you want to get in the case with, you want to start a fun little chat, and you want to say, who's the best corner Georgia's had in recent memory since an Eric Stokes or a Tyson Campbell. We've got to remember he went 33rd overall, just missed being a first-rounder as well off that 2020 defense. But you got to think Kamari Lassiter might be the best corner Georgia has had since those times, and that includes Keeley. That includes Darion Kendrick as well, some guys that really, really got it done for Georgia.
And then my final bold prediction is this, Jeff. Maybe this goes without saying, but I want to put it out there right now. I believe that Georgia will go for 3 in 23. I believe it's going to win the national championship again this season. And I'm hesitant to want to say that, because here's the other thing I believe. I honestly believe it's going to be hard. I think that the blueprint a year ago could very likely return here this year, where you have at least one regular season game where you're challenged, and probably one postseason game, either SEC championship or college football playoff, where you're challenged. I think the blueprint from a year ago may replicate itself this year. A tough regular season game, a tough postseason game. But, Jeff, I just don't see a very compelling argument against Georgia doing it. Even if we say transition at quarterback, replacing Stetson Bennett proves to be more difficult than some people give it credit for, and this or that or whatever. I mean, when you look at how Georgia handled its business last year in comparison to the other would-be championship contenders, it's going to take more than just the obvious foreseeable shortcomings to think that Georgia could actually lose when it really matters here this year. I don't say this flippantly. I don't say it lightly. I know the historic significance of winning 3 straight national championships, but I believe the compelling case right now is on the side of Georgia doing just that. My bold prediction is that Georgia will go for 3 in 23.
So I want to say something here that maybe if you'd have asked me in 2021, I would have probably scoffed at. But so here's my kind of big one, kind of riffing off what you said there. I usually believe that college football is very hard.
Yep.
And there are 1 or 2 games where you're not at your best. The other guys are geeked up. Missouri, that script from last year, I'm glad you referred to it that way. It's just hard to win. There's you'd have an injury. Let's remember how fortunate Georgia has been with injuries at the quarterback position so far in the Kirby Smart era, large stretches of time where Stetson Bennett started. I mean, you can make the case that Jacob Eason got hurt, but then Jake Fromm filled in admirably. And you can make the case that J.T. Daniels, was hurt as well at Georgia. But they haven't had an injury situation that drastically reduced the quality of performer at quarterback, or the output at quarterback, let's say. But as much as I want to say that, like, it's always so hard to get up for 15 games, 12 games, 13, 14 games in a row. I get all that. That's basically the Old Testament way of looking at college football. But, man, Brandon, there's a lot of things about this football program that Georgia is in right now where it defies that college football history. I think Carson Beck can defy some really good stats thrown out there that you don't get picked in the first round if you only start 15 games in college football. Because he's been in the Georgia program for so long, practicing against so many future NFL players, that he's had tremendous seasoning even before he steps on the field. And then he catches all those NFL prototypes as well with his size and his arm and everything else and his release. But I look at this Georgia team, and I think they're doing things that are kind of defying the physics of college football. What I mean by that is there's almost every position on the Georgia roster, outside of maybe Brock Bowers and Mykel Williams, that they could take a major devastating injury. And the drop-off, to use a metaphor, to use a comparison here that college football, NCAA college football fans will appreciate. If you lose a 95 rating player on the field, the guy coming in is probably an 87 or an 88 or an 89. That's how good they are. A lot of these blowouts, Brandon, that should go on script this year are going to allow Georgia the fact to play a lot of those young players and give them a lot of reps, where probably by the end of the season, you might have one of those key freshman starters looking a lot like Malachi Starks did last year. When a name, there's a lot of names you can say, whether it be a Damon Wilson or an A.J. Harris or Janelle Aguero or a Raylan Wilson or a C.J. Allen or even a Jamal Jarrett or a Jordan Big Daddy Hall. If you see that name creep into a starting lineup by week 5, 6, or 7, that's usually going to mean that is a fantastic player that they just could not keep off the field. And I think a lot of things Georgia can do this year, they have so much depth, they have so much stacked talent, especially at the quarterback position. They have Heisman contenders. They fixed their wide receiver room. They flipped it over with a lot of future first-round type guys on offense. I really think this team is capable of kind of flying in the face of a lot of things that we just never thought could happen in college football.
Jeff, I think that's really well said and a fascinating thing to consider here as we head towards the 2023 season. Great stuff from you. And once again, truly, thank you so much for staying on top of everything else that's happening with UGA recruiting. It's such a fun time for Georgia fans following all of that. And I know you'll be ready to break in at a moment's notice when anything happens here over the course of the next few days. I'll also looking forward to talking to you back here live about everything with the 2024 class once I'm back from vacation next week. So enjoy it, Jeff. Hope your summer's getting off to a great start, and we will look forward to talking to you very soon, right back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Brandon, the one thing I was preparing myself for with your bold predictions were for you to say that our good buddy and great teammate Mike Griffith reverses his stance on Jacksonville. That would, my friend, would have been the boldest prediction of 2023.
Indeed, that would have been the case, Jeff. That's fun stuff. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Take it easy, man.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great catching up with Jeff Sentell, as we typically do on a Friday. Of course, not recruiting talk as much this time around, but we'll get back to that again next week. And obviously, as Georgia's in the midst of a major recruiting official visit weekend, Jeff will be all over all of that, going live and doing whatever's necessary if big recruiting news breaks. And when I'm back from vacation next week, I'll look forward to talking to all of you about that there as well. For now, though, it's time to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. It's time for you to take a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Choose from all the great variety of cruise options. The 3-night sailing, which you go out over a weekend. The 4-night sailing, that's what our DawgNation cruise was. We were on Independence of the Seas. You sail out on a Monday, you're back on a Friday. You're not really touching either of the two weekends necessarily. It's just a good way for people with busy schedules to experience the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer, at least a taste of the best of what Royal Caribbean has to offer. But if you want the big experience, the full experience, do it like I did back in February. Take that 7-night sailing on an Oasis-class ship. I was on Wonder of the Seas, largest cruise ship in the world, and I took advantage of everything on board. All the beverages, all the food, all the entertainment, all the great beaches, everything. We did all of that. And in January of 2024, it gets even better. The debut of Icon of the Seas there as well, which will completely redefine what Royal Caribbean means by a cruise vacation. So contact Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She can help you with all of that. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. All right, final in a series of conversations we've been having with you this week, looking at bold predictions for each team in the SEC. We've got 4 left. We're going to run through them all here, starting with the Fighting Tigers of LSU. And here's my bold prediction for LSU in the 2023 season. I believe that LSU will make the college football playoff. And what we've seen in recent years is, and this, by the way, this is the final year of the 14 playoff. So the model that's been in place, this will be the last year of that. We have certainly seen a willingness to put in 2 SEC teams. But in the past, that has been both Georgia and Alabama, 2017, 2021. Last year, we saw 2 Big Ten teams make it. This year, I believe that LSU is going to be the second of those 2 SEC teams, along with Georgia, that makes the college football playoff. My reason for that is that I believe that LSU will be poised to win the game at the beginning of the season against Florida State. And I'm not quite so sure there's any game this season that is obviously bigger than what LSU Florida State can be to kick off the season. Last year when these two teams got together, it was sort of a fun non-conference game between traditional powers, and you always like that kind of stuff beginning of the year. As the season wore on, you look back on it, you realize, as quirky and weird as it was actually a pretty pivotal game in 2022, given how good the Seminoles and the Tigers ended up being. Well, now we know what's at stake for Florida State and LSU, and I've got respect for Florida State as a good team, but the early indication I have is that I believe that LSU likely wins that game. And that means that if you're a 12-0 LSU going into the SEC championship, even if you lose to Georgia, then I think you have the chance to make the college football playoff as an enlarged team because of what you did during non-conference play. And I do believe that LSU could be good enough for a 12-0 regular season, rendering the SEC championship in its final year in terms of divisional play perhaps meaningless, that LSU might be in the position to make the playoff no matter what, much the same way that Georgia very likely will be there as well. So I think a big season is on tap for LSU. I think they've got 2 quarterbacks better than anything that Alabama has. I think they kind of demonstrated last year how good they can be, and I believe they could take the next step as a program here this year. In fact, we predicted they will, a college football playoff berth for the LSU Tigers here in 2023. A bold prediction for Auburn. I believe that Auburn finishes 3rd in the SEC West this year. And I think that's bad news if you're Texas A&M, if you're Lane Kiffin in Ole Miss, if you're Sam Pittman in Arkansas. But the fact of the matter is that I do believe that Hugh Freeze is a bit of a difference-making coach. Not enough of a difference-maker yet to really get the attention of LSU, and probably not even Alabama either. I think the Iron Bowl will be fun with Hugh Freeze coaching it, but I'd be surprised if Auburn beats Alabama this season. However, could he beat a few more teams in the SEC West? Could he earn a few wins to at least get him in kind of that upper half of this division this year? Yeah, I think he possibly could. And as I said before, I think that's really bad news for other coaches who are also trying to build their program simultaneous with what Auburn's doing with Freeze. But I think he can make some noise here in year 1, 3rd in the SEC West. That is our prediction for Auburn. And you better believe, we talked earlier this week about, hey, Billy Napier being on the hot seat at Florida and maybe a little bit of a disappointing setback for Josh Heupel at Tennessee. All of the weight of those expectations will become even heavier if Freeze is better than he's supposed to be in year 1. Keep your eye on that. For Missouri, a bold prediction to the extent that you care, I believe that Eli Drinkwitz is the most likely SEC coach to be fired at the end of this season. And I don't say that necessarily because Drinkwitz is obviously doing a terrible job. The truth is he's not obviously doing a terrible job. Their recruiting at times has not been awful, and there are moments on the field where they certainly look pretty competent. It's not that Drinkwitz is completely overmatched by the SEC. At times, I don't know that he necessarily has been. But here's ultimately the issue that's at stake. Everything in the SEC is about to get much tougher, especially for the teams in the bottom half of the SEC East, teams such as Missouri. And if Drinkwitz does not give a compelling reason this season for Missouri to want to keep him, all the more reason, even though he just signed like a 2-year extension last year, which is sort of a strange contract deal anyway, but all the more reason where Missouri may feel the pressure with new money coming in because of the SEC media rights deal to make sure they are more buttoned up moving into what could be a much more challenging SEC schedule. Because if they don't figure that out prior to the expansion to what might be a 9-game slate, bringing in Texas and Oklahoma, and by the way, Missouri is almost certainly going to be playing Oklahoma each and every year if this team goes to a 3-opponent permanent model there, then Missouri could really find themselves in a calamitous situation. That if Drinkwitz gives them a reason to, I believe they'll move off of him and fire him at the end of the season. I think he's the most likely SEC coach to be fired. And then a very quick, bold prediction for Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt last year was probably quietly better than you realize. They won 3 non-conference games. They won twice in the SEC. I don't quite think they'll be that good this year. I think they'll win fewer than 2 SEC games at the very least. And so Clark Lee, surprisingly has kind of done okay in his early days here as Vanderbilt coach, especially last year, getting more wins than you probably realized. They benefited from a completely overmatched Hawaii opponent last year and some things like that. We guess, I think it's fairly safe to assume that Vanderbilt probably regresses here a little bit. So to the extent this counts as a bold prediction, I'll take Vandy being slightly worse this year than it was a year ago, and we'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Like, how many people, now this audience is obviously, very well versed in everything as it relates to Southeastern Conference, so you're not fooled by this. How many people think really even know that Vandy won 2 SEC games a year ago? I'm guessing that flew under the radar for a lot of people. Pretty quietly, Clark Lee had a good season. Same thing about Josh Heupel. It's just sort of hard to do this, year over year. Just a hard thing to be able to do. So that is something worth keeping in mind. Let me also say this very quick before we wrap up here today. Y'all, vacation time is something that our family just loves, being together away from work. And I really appreciate your willingness to allow me to do it. We don't like being gone from here. I love doing the show. I don't like not having a show to give to you because we do truly think of this as DawgNation Daily. But the fact that you let me be away, enjoy this time, I just appreciate it so much. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you back here live on Monday. Gator Hater Countdown, by the way, Georgia beating up on Florida 148 days from right now. Y'all have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. As I was saying before, I take it very seriously. I love doing the show for you. Don't like being away from it. But occasionally, it's important to kind of completely pull away from work and, be with family and enjoy my kids here as they're kind of getting out of school. And that's what we're doing here this week. And I appreciate you allowing me to do it. I really do. I love it. I love being at work, but I also love stepping away from work. I just love everything, I guess. But nonetheless, you guys are very kind to still tune back in and watch and be a part of what we're doing here, even though it's a little bit different than the normal show that we typically do. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'll invite you to check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Water heater goes out, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. And please find us back here on Monday. Everything will be back to normal. 1st and 15 at 9:45, live show at 10 a.m., live comments when it's all said and done, and I'm sure we'll be chomping at the bit to react to everything that has happened around UGA while we've been gone. So we will do that with you then. Stay close to Dog Nation for a busy recruiting weekend here around UGA, and we will talk in our normal format after the weekend is done. See you then, everybody.